The alien forest stretched endlessly under a sky painted with two suns. Light shimmered through leaves that were taller than any human tree, and the air vibrated softly, filled with the quiet hum of life. Lyra moved cautiously among the towering trunks, her translucent skin catching the dappled sunlight. Each step was careful, measured. Her large eyes scanned the forest floor, which glowed faintly with bioluminescent moss, warning her of unseen dangers. In her world, the forests were alive not only with plants and creatures, but also with energy, a subtle field that connected everything. Lyra's heart beat faster, but not only from the speed of her movements. Her mate indicator, a small device embedded near her chest, pulsed faintly, a soft blue glow that was barely visible under her clothing. She had been trained to ignore it, to control it, but today it pulsed again, stronger than ever before. She clenched her hands to keep herself steady, but the sensation made her tremble. The forest was dangerous, yes, but she knew this glow was not from fear, it was from something else, something foreign. Captain Elias had no idea he was about to change everything. He stepped lightly over a fallen branch, careful not to disturb the delicate ecosystem around him. The human team had been exploring the planet for weeks, trying to understand its strange biochemistry and the unusual behavior of its native life forms. He glanced around, noting the glowing patterns on the ground and the faint hum of energy that seemed to ripple through the air. It was beautiful, but it was also intimidating. He had been trained for hostile environments, but this place felt different. It felt alive in a way he had never experienced. Lyra spotted him before he noticed her. She crouched behind a thick trunk, peering out with wide eyes. Humans were unpredictable, and this tall, pale-skinned creature with curious eyes, was moving with caution but with a calm confidence that was unusual. Her mate indicator flickered again, this time brighter. She froze, unsure what it meant. She had seen her indicator glow in response to her own people, but never in reaction to a human. Her culture had many rules about these devices, rules she had been taught since she was a child. The glow represented trust, connection, and potential bond, but it was sacred and it was private. Elias moved closer to a cluster of alien flora that shimmered with soft light. He reached out to take a sample, and the air around him vibrated faintly. Lyra's indicator flared. She gasped softly and stumbled back, her hand brushing against a hanging vine. The vine's energy caused a small tree to quake, sending a shower of glowing spores into the air. Elias turned sharply, startled, and his gaze caught hers for the first time. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Lyra froze, unsure whether to run or stay. The glow of her indicator was strong now, bright enough to cast a faint blue light over her skin. Elias, for all his training, had never seen anything like this. He tilted his head, curiosity overtaking caution. He did not move forward. Instead, he raised his hand slightly, a gesture of peace he had learned from observing alien encounters. Lyra's instincts screamed at her to flee. Her people valued control and discretion above all else. Being seen like this with her indicator glowing was dangerous. It could bring unwanted attention, questions, or worse, mistrust. She darted to the side, barely making a sound. Elias blinked, confused, watching as the alien disappeared behind the thick undergrowth. He felt no fear, only fascination. Something about this encounter felt significant, though he did not yet understand why. The human team was not far behind him, but Elias stayed where he was. He had always been the type to pause and observe, to understand before acting. He crouched low, scanning the area where Lyra had vanished. The forest seemed to pulse around him, as if it were aware of their presence. He took a cautious step forward, reaching out with a small sensor to measure the energy in the air. The readings were extraordinary. Something about this place, about the interaction, was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Meanwhile, Lyra moved quickly through the forest, keeping low and silent. Her indicator pulsed erratically, signaling intense emotional activity. She did not understand why the human's presence affected her this way. She had studied them from a distance, knew their physiology, their gestures, even their language attempts, but she had never interacted directly. And now, something in him had triggered a response she could not explain. She tried to calm herself, to steady her breathing, but every pulse of her indicator made her tremble, every flicker of blue light a reminder that her reaction was no longer entirely under her control. She ducked into a narrow ravine, hoping to hide, and leaned against the cool rock. The glowing spores from earlier floated around her, catching in her hair and illuminating her face. She pressed her palms to her chest, feeling the subtle vibrations of her indicator. She could not deny it. Her body was reacting strongly, though not in a way she fully understood. It was as if some unseen thread had connected her to the human, and the connection was alive, pulsing through her very being. Elias moved cautiously along the forest path, using his scanner to map the terrain. He noticed faint tracks in the glowing moss and decided to follow them. His instincts told him the alien had not fled out of fear alone. There was curiosity there, intelligence, perhaps even awareness of the strange bond he could not yet explain. He spoke softly to himself, almost as if to reassure the alien that he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly, knowing she could not hear him, yet feeling the words were important. Lyra's thoughts raced. She could sense the human was following, but she could also feel something else, an understanding, a patience that was unusual for her species. Her indicator pulsed stronger with every step he took, and she realized that running might not be enough. The bond, if she could even call it that, was forming despite her efforts. She had heard stories of her people forming bonds through the indicator, but it usually required intentional effort and trust built over weeks, months, sometimes years. This had happened in seconds. As she moved deeper into the forest, she stumbled upon a clearing where the trees grew in a perfect circle, their branches entwined like guardians of some sacred space. Lyra paused, sensing that this place was important. Her indicator flared brightly, almost painfully, as though the forest itself recognized the human's presence. Elias appeared at the edge of the clearing, careful not to step on the glowing moss. He stopped and observed, realizing that whatever this was, it was more than simple biology. This alien, and perhaps her entire species, had a depth of perception and sensitivity humans had never encountered. For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to observe him. His face was open, calm, and focused. There was no threat in his eyes, only curiosity and determination. The indicator's glow softened slightly, as if acknowledging that he posed no immediate danger. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, testing whether the connection would persist. Elias mirrored her movements, staying still, patient, waiting for her to decide what to do. Minutes passed in silence, the forest around them alive with subtle light and sound. Then a sudden rustling in the trees startled them both. A small creature, bioluminescent and covered in iridescent feathers, darted across the clearing and disappeared into the underbrush. Lyra's indicator flared again, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the moment. She realized that despite her instincts to hide, the human had proven trustworthy simply by remaining calm. Elias finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "You're safe," he said. "I won't hurt you." He made a small gesture with his hands, imitating a universal sign of peace he had seen on his travels. Lyra watched him, her indicator's glow dimming slightly. Trust was forming, but it was fragile. She knew one wrong move could end it. Yet in that moment she felt something new, a sense of possibility, a chance for understanding that transcended species, culture, and even the rules she had been taught. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the clearing. The moss and trees vibrated faintly, as if reacting to some distant energy. Lyra's indicator flared brightly, warning her of danger. Elias stepped forward instinctively, scanning the surroundings. The forest was alive in a way he had never felt before, responding not only to their movements but perhaps to the connection forming between them. Lyra's heart pounded as she realized that whatever was happening, it had only just begun. Her species had always kept the mate indicators private, sacred, and controlled, yet here she was, exposed to a human, and her device pulsed in response to him. She trembled unconsciously, unsure whether the glow was a warning, a signal, or something else entirely. Elias, sensing her hesitation, made no move forward, only waited, patient and steady. The tension hung in the air, thick and electric. Neither spoke, yet both understood that this encounter was significant. It was not simply a meeting of two beings from different worlds. It was the beginning of something profound, a connection that might alter the course of their lives and, perhaps, the future of their species. As the suns began to set, casting long shadows across the glowing forest floor, Lyra finally took a step closer, her indicator pulsing steadily but no longer wildly. Elias remained where he was, allowing her to choose the pace. In that moment, the boundaries between species, between worlds, seemed to blur. The forest watched silently, bearing witness to the first true understanding between alien and human. And so, the first encounter ended not with conflict or fear, but with curiosity, trust, and a connection neither fully understood. The mate indicator, glowing softly against her chest, was a silent promise that their story was only beginning. White heavy checkmark word count, ~1, 610 words. Part 2, 1600 words kaleko or interesting hunachea or third-person style, ma lekni ha or simple basic English ka or violated free hona chai without short heading absolutely. Here's part 2 in third person, simple English, ~1600 words, safe, engaging, HFY Sci-Fi style, continuing directly from part 1. The forest seemed alive in a way that made Elia's skin tingle. Every step he took felt measured by the ground beneath him, as if the trees themselves were aware of his presence. Lyra moved ahead just out of sight, but Elias could feel her presence. Her glow, her mate indicator, was no longer frantic. It pulsed steadily now, a rhythm that mirrored his own heartbeat. Elias had no idea what it meant, only that it was important. Somehow, he felt responsible for it, though he had done nothing more than exist in the same space. Lyra's people were wary by nature. Their forests were sacred, and every interaction with outsiders carried risk. Today, however, her instincts told her this human was different. He had touched her, albeit accidentally, and something had responded in her very being. She had fled instinctively, as training demanded, but now she found herself observing him, curious. The indicator was no longer just a warning, it was a signal, one she did not fully understand. She moved silently through the undergrowth, keeping her distance but never losing sight of him. Elias walked slowly, careful not to startle her again. He studied the forest, taking notes in a small device strapped to his arm. He spoke softly into it. Alien bioluminescence is reactive, possible neural energy feedback, signals some form of recognition, unknown variable, emotional or cultural response. He paused, glancing toward the shadowy figure moving ahead. Subject may be observing me. Connection detected, nature unclear. Lyra froze when she realized he had spoken. The human was not just observing, he was trying to understand, to communicate. She had expected fear, aggression, or indifference. But this calm, measured attention was something she could not ignore. Her pulse quickened and the glow of her indicator brightened slightly. She felt the energy in the forest shift, reacting to her emotions. It was disorienting. She had trained for years to control her body and the indicator, yet it now pulsed on its own, responding to a human she barely knew. Elias continued forward, scanning the area. He reached a small clearing and crouched behind a low boulder, hoping to remain unseen. From this vantage point, he could see the alien more clearly. Lyra was cautious, but she did not run this time. Her movements were precise, almost deliberate. The forest around her seemed to acknowledge her presence. Elias realized that the trees, the moss, even the air, were responding to her in ways he did not yet understand. Minutes passed, the forest vibrating with quiet life. Elias took a deep breath. He could feel something forming, a connection he could not explain. Lyra's indicator pulsed steadily, sending waves of energy he could feel faintly even without touching her. He moved carefully, lowering his hands to show he meant no harm. "I only want to learn," he said softly. "I am not a threat." Lyra hesitated. The words were meaningless in her language, but she understood the intention. His gestures, the calm in his voice, the patience in his stance, they all signaled that he would not force her. She had learned that humans could be unpredictable, but this one was different. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she lowered her guard. Her indicator dimmed slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of trust. The peace was short-lived. A sudden tremor ran through the ground, making the trees sway violently. Leaves and spores rained down from the canopy. Lyra instinctively ducked, and Elias did the same. The forest was alive with energy, responding not only to the tremor but to the bond forming between them. Lyra's indicator flared brightly, warning her of danger. She realized the human was affected too, though in a different way. His heartbeat was faster, his eyes wide with awareness, yet he did not panic. They moved together without speaking. Lyra led, weaving through the thick forest with grace and speed. Elias followed, careful to mimic her pace. He trusted her instincts, she trusted his presence. The tremor was growing stronger, shaking the moss and trees around them. Small creatures darted from their hiding places, squeaking and chirping in alarm. The forest was alive with sound, but amid the chaos, a pattern emerged, a pathway that seemed to guide them forward. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a small clearing. At its center stood a structure unlike anything Elias had ever seen. It was made of smooth, white material that shimmered in the light of the twin suns. Strange symbols were etched across its surface, glowing faintly with the same energy that ran through the forest. Lyra stopped at the edge of the clearing, her indicator pulsing with intensity. She had never brought an outsider this close to a sacred place. "This is extraordinary," Elias murmured, stepping forward cautiously. He raised his scanner, taking readings. The energy levels were off the charts, more intense than anything recorded on Earth. "The readings, it's like the forest itself is alive and this structure is connected to it," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. Lyra's pulse quickened. The structure was ancient, older than any human settlement, older than most records of her people. It held power, knowledge, and perhaps danger. She had been trained to protect it, to prevent outsiders from activating it unintentionally. Yet here she was, with a human, standing at its threshold. Her indicator glowed brighter with every heartbeat, signaling heightened emotional resonance. Elias reached out, almost instinctively, to touch one of the etched symbols. Lyra reacted immediately, stepping forward and placing her hand over his. "No," she said sharply in her language. She pointed to her indicator, which pulsed brightly. Elias did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. He withdrew his hand, nodding slightly. He would wait. The moment was tense, charged with energy. Lyra's indicator pulsed, sending waves of subtle vibrations through the air. Elias could feel them faintly, a connection he could not explain. He realized that the device was not just a cultural artifact. It was a form of communication, a signal of trust, compatibility, and emotional response. He could sense her feelings without words, and she could sense his. Minutes passed in silence. Lyra's breathing slowed, and her indicator dimmed to a steady glow. She looked at Elias, studying him. She realized that the connection between them could be used for something important. Perhaps they could work together, combining human ingenuity with alien knowledge. The tremor that had brought them here was not random. It was a sign, a test of their ability to cooperate. Suddenly, the structure began to hum, a low vibration that ran through the ground and into their feet. The symbols glowed brighter, reacting to their presence. Lyra instinctively stepped back, warning Elias to do the same. The human froze, observing, sensing the same energy that made her pulse with alertness. The forest around them seemed to respond, the bioluminescent moss glowing brighter, the leaves rustling as if whispering a warning. It's alive," Elias whispered, more to himself than to her. He could feel the energy coursing through the clearing, interacting with the bond forming between him and Lyra. He realized that they were not just observers, they were part of the system now. Every movement, every thought, every pulse of emotion affected the structure and the forest around it. Lyra's indicator flared once more, brighter than ever. She trembled unconsciously, her body reacting to the immense energy of the structure. Elias, sensing her distress, spoke softly. "I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." The words had no meaning in her language, yet the tone, the intention, and the calm steadiness of his voice reached her. The indicator pulsed less violently, settling into a steady rhythm. Trust was forming slowly but surely. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the air, through the trees, and into their bones. Lyra realized that if the energy was not controlled, it could become dangerous. She turned to Elias, pointing to a symbol that pulsed in sync with her indicator. "Follow," she said, motioning for him to move to a specific point. Elias hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. He mirrored her actions carefully, letting her guide him. Together they approached the symbol. Lyra placed her hand against it, feeling the pulse of energy that connected the forest, the structure, and now the human standing beside her. Elias followed suit, his hand resting lightly on hers. The moment their hands touched the symbol together, the hum reached a crescendo, and the clearing was bathed in blinding light. Lyra's indicator glowed in harmony with the symbols, creating a rhythm that resonated through the forest. The energy was overwhelming, yet not destructive. Lyra felt a surge of understanding, as if the forest itself was communicating with her. Elias felt it too, a wave of knowledge and intuition passing through him. Together, they realized that the structure was a repository of information, knowledge of the planet and its species, waiting for the right beings to activate it. As the light dimmed, the hum subsided, leaving a sense of calm in the clearing. Lyra looked at Elias, her indicator glowing steadily but gently. She no longer trembled. She understood that he had passed the first test: patience, respect, and trust. The bond between them had begun to form, not of romance, but of cooperation, understanding, and shared purpose. Elias studied the structure and then glanced at her. He understood, without words, that this was only the beginning. The forest had accepted them, the structure had opened to them, and now they shared a connection that neither fully understood but both recognized as extraordinary. Lyra breathed deeply, letting the calm settle over her. She knew her people would question this encounter, would demand explanations for the human's presence and the reaction of her indicator. But she also knew that this connection could change everything. Humans and her species had much to learn from each other, and this moment was the first step toward cooperation, trust, and perhaps even friendship. As the suns began to set again, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Lyra and Elias moved together out of the clearing. Her indicator glowed softly, a steady reminder of the bond forming between them. The forest hummed quietly, as if acknowledging the partnership that had been forged. Neither spoke, yet both understood the significance of what had just occurred. The tremors, the structure, the forest, all had tested them, and together they had passed. The journey back through the trees was cautious but calm. Lyra led, showing Elias safe paths and warning him of unstable ground. He followed closely, learning quickly, observing every detail. The bond between them remained subtle but strong, a quiet thread of trust and understanding woven into every step. By the time they reached the edge of the forest where the human team waited, the connection was undeniable, though neither fully grasped its potential. The team looked up at them with relief. Elias gave a small nod, acknowledging the alien's silent guidance. Lyra's indicator glowed softly under her chest, a sign that the encounter had ended peacefully but meaningfully. Both species had learned something invaluable. Patience, understanding, and cooperation could bridge worlds. And in the quiet glow of her indicator, Lyra sensed that this was only the beginning. The human had touched her life in a way that would resonate far beyond this forest, far beyond the understanding of her people. The future was uncertain, but together, they had taken the first step toward a shared destiny. The forest seemed calmer now, but the sense of tension remained. Lyra led Elias through twisting paths where the glowing moss formed delicate patterns across the ground. She moved carefully, every step deliberate, aware that the forest itself was alive and watching. Her indicator pulsed softly, no longer frantic but steady, a quiet rhythm that matched the human's presence. Elias noticed the subtle change and realized that this alien device was more than a signal. It was a mirror of her thoughts and trust. Elias moved quietly behind her, careful not to disrupt the forest's natural energy. His team had stayed behind at the edge of the forest, but he knew this path was dangerous. He had been trained for hazardous terrain, but nothing in his training had prepared him for a forest that seemed to respond to emotion and thought. Every leaf that shimmered, every branch that bent, felt like it was alive, interacting with them, sensing their intentions. The tremors from the last encounter had passed, but he could still feel residual energy thrumming through the air. Lyra sensed it too. The forest was not only alive, it was protective. She could feel the pulse of energy growing stronger in some areas and weaker in others, guiding them forward. Her indicator glowed more brightly when she sensed danger, dimming when the path was safe. Elias noticed the glow and instinctively slowed his pace, following her lead. They communicated without words, using the subtle cues of gesture and presence. The deeper they went, the denser the forest became. Trees twisted into strange shapes, their bioluminescent leaves forming arcs that created shadows and pockets of glowing light. The moss on the ground seemed almost sentient, shifting slightly under their feet, forming patterns that Elias tried to record with his scanner. Lyra observed him quietly, noting the human's curiosity and intelligence. He was learning quickly, adapting to the rhythms of the forest, and that impressed her. The connection between them, though silent, was growing stronger. Suddenly, a low hum echoed through the trees. The vibration ran through the ground and into their feet. Lyra froze, her indicator flaring. Elias felt it too, a subtle pressure in his chest, like the forest itself was warning them. They moved cautiously toward the source, each step careful and deliberate. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the air, resonating with the energy that ran through the trees. Lyra recognized the sound, an alert from the forest that something was approaching. A shadow moved ahead, large and fast, barely visible through the glowing foliage. Elias instinctively stepped in front of Lyra, putting himself between her and the unknown threat. The creature that emerged was unlike anything he had seen. Its body was sleek and covered in shimmering scales that reflected the forest's light. Multiple eyes, glowing faintly, scanned the area as it moved with predatory grace. It was clear this being was dangerous, and it had detected them. Lyra's indicator flared violently. She had never felt such intense energy from a single creature before. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, but she knew that running would trigger a chase. Instead, she focused, drawing on the energy of the forest. She gestured to Elias, signaling him to stay close and follow her lead. The human nodded, trusting her without hesitation, and together they began to move in a pattern that avoided the creature's attention. The predator prowled nearby, its glowing eyes scanning every shadow. Lyra moved swiftly, using the forest's natural energy to mask their presence. Her indicator pulsed rapidly, a combination of fear, focus, and trust. Elias mirrored her movements, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of light and shadow. They advanced slowly, using the curves of the terrain, the glowing moss, and the protective hum of the forest to hide from the predator. Minutes stretched into tense hours as they navigated the forest. The creature followed them at a distance, its presence felt more than seen. Lyra's indicator remained bright, warning her of every movement. Elias, though human, felt the connection through her device, sensing the danger even when he could not see it. They moved in near silence, communicating with gestures, eye contact, and instinct. The bond between them had grown from curiosity to trust, and it was now a lifeline. Finally, they reached a small canyon, a narrow space between towering cliffs. The predator could not easily follow here, and Lyra took a moment to breathe. Her indicator's glow softened, signaling a temporary sense of safety. Elias leaned against the rocky wall, studying the patterns in the stone and the faint traces of energy in the air. He realized the forest was not only alive, it was intelligent, capable of responding to emotion, thought, and intention. Lyra studied him closely. She realized that the human was beginning to understand her people's ways, not through words, but through observation and intuition. His presence no longer caused her indicator to flare unpredictably. Instead, it pulsed in harmony with hers, a steady rhythm that mirrored trust and cooperation. She allowed herself a small sense of relief, knowing that together they could face the challenges ahead. The silence was broken by a faint ripple in the energy around them. Lyra sensed it first, a shift in the forest, a subtle change that indicated something approaching. Elias felt it too, a vibration in the air, like a warning signal. He turned to her, ready to act, but she raised a hand, signaling patience. The predator had not yet arrived, but they were not alone. From the shadows, a group of smaller creatures emerged. They were less threatening than the predator, but clearly territorial. Their eyes glowed softly, and their movements were cautious, almost curious. Lyra's indicator pulsed gently, signaling that the energy of these beings was reactive but not hostile. She gestured for Elias to move slowly, using the natural formations of the canyon to remain unseen. The creatures observed them for a moment before retreating back into the shadows, their curiosity satisfied. The encounter reminded Lyra of the delicate balance of the forest. Every creature, every plant, every pulse of energy was part of a network that maintained life here. Humans, she realized, had the potential to disrupt it, but Elias was different. He respected the rhythm of the forest, adapted to its signals, and trusted her guidance. Her indicator reflected this understanding, pulsing steadily with reassurance. They continued deeper into the canyon, moving toward a destination Lyra had only recently discovered. A hidden cave, partially obscured by natural rock formations and energy fields, contained a repository of knowledge left by an ancient civilization. Lyra's people had protected it for centuries, and she had been trained to navigate its defenses. Elias would have been unaware of its significance if not for her guidance. The entrance to the cave shimmered faintly with energy, a barrier that responded to the presence of sentient beings. Lyra approached cautiously, placing her hand near the opening. Her indicator pulsed brightly, reacting to the complex energy fields. Elias watched closely, following her actions step by step. She whispered instructions, using gestures and subtle movements, and he mirrored them, careful not to trigger any traps. Finally, the barrier shimmered and dissolved, revealing a passage beyond. Inside, the cave was filled with glowing symbols etched into the walls. The energy here was intense, vibrating through the air and into their very bones. Lyra's indicator flared, a combination of excitement, relief, and caution. Elias could feel the energy too, though differently, like a resonance that stirred curiosity and awe rather than warning. The cave contained knowledge of the planet's ecosystem, its energy flows, and the history of its intelligent species. Lyra traced her fingers over the symbols, feeling the connections and understanding the information encoded within. Elias observed, scanning with his devices, translating the energy patterns into readable data. Together, they began to piece together the secrets of the forest, combining alien insight with human technology. Hours passed as they worked, the bond between them strengthening with every shared discovery. Lyra's indicator pulsed steadily, reflecting her growing trust in Elias and the harmony of their collaboration. She realized that their partnership was more than practical. It was a bridge between species, a demonstration that understanding and cooperation could overcome instinctive fear and cultural differences. But the forest had not finished testing them. A tremor shook the ground again, stronger than before. The cave walls vibrated and energy patterns on the surfaces flickered. Lyra's indicator flared violently, signaling danger. Elias reacted instinctively, moving to shield her as the entrance trembled. The smaller creatures they had passed earlier appeared again, agitated by the disturbance. Lyra took a deep breath, focusing on the forest's rhythm. She sensed that the energy surge was not random. It was a test, a challenge that required them to work together. They moved quickly, using the cave's natural formations to stabilize the energy fields. Lyra guided Elias with precise gestures, and he followed without hesitation. The bond between them was crucial now, each pulse of the indicator providing feedback, each movement in harmony with the forest's energy. Together, they managed to calm the surge, channeling the energy into the cave's systems rather than allowing it to erupt dangerously. When the tremor finally subsided, the cave was quiet once more. Lyra's indicator glowed softly, reflecting a sense of accomplishment and relief. Elias stood beside her, breathless but focused, aware that they had faced a challenge few could have survived. The forest outside remained alive, observing silently, but the immediate danger had passed. Lyra looked at Elias, understanding that their journey was far from over. The cave held more secrets, more tests, and more challenges, but they had passed the first true trial. Her indicator pulsed steadily, a quiet signal of trust, cooperation, and the growing bond between them. Elias returned her glance, understanding without words that together they had achieved something extraordinary. As they exited the cave, the forest welcomed them back with a soft glow, the moss and trees humming gently. Lyra led the way, and Elias followed, ready to face whatever came next. The bond they had formed was no longer a simple reaction. It was a connection that would guide them through the trials ahead, a partnership between human and alien, built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. And so, with the forest alive around them, the bond solidified by trial and trust, they continued deeper into the unknown, ready for the challenges that awaited. The sun was low in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the glowing forest. Lyra and Elias moved cautiously, each aware of the forest's subtle energy and the pulse of her indicator, now steady but alert. The cave they had discovered earlier had revealed much about the planet, its energy networks, its living ecosystem, and the delicate balance between life forms. Yet they both knew the greatest challenge had not yet arrived. The forest had been quiet for a moment, but that stillness often meant something was coming. Elias followed closely behind Lyra, his eyes scanning the forest while keeping pace with her careful steps. He had learned to read the energy of the planet, sensing the vibrations in the air and the subtle movements of the moss beneath their feet. Humans had technology, but here, in this living forest, instinct and observation were just as crucial. He relied on Lyra to guide him, and she relied on him to adapt quickly, to remain calm under pressure. Together, they were more than a human and an alien. They were a team. The deeper they moved, the more intense the energy became. Lyra's indicator pulsed steadily, alerting her to shifts in the forest. Elia's could feel the resonance through the subtle vibrations of the ground. Suddenly, the air shimmered ahead of them. Lyra paused, crouching behind a low arch of twisted roots. The shimmer became visible, a faint ripple in the air like a curtain of heat. Through it, they could see movement, a massive shape, larger than any creature they had encountered before, moving with deliberate force. The creature stepped forward, its scales glinting in the twin suns' light. Its eyes were sharp, intelligent, and aware. The smaller predator they had encountered before had been a test, but this was something greater. This was a guardian, ancient and powerful, attuned to the forest's energy. Lyra's indicator flared, a warning of danger and the intensity of the challenge. Elias felt the energy too, his chest tightening with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Lyra motioned for Elias to stay low. They crept forward, using the natural shadows and glowing moss to conceal themselves. The guardian moved methodically, scanning the forest, seemingly aware of their presence without directly seeing them. Every step it took caused a ripple in the energy, a vibration that resonated through the forest floor and into their feet. Lyra's indicator pulsed with a mix of fear, focus, and determination. She knew that a wrong move could provoke the Guardian, and a direct attack would be catastrophic. They needed a plan. Lyra turned to Elias, pointing to the symbols etched into the trees along the path. These symbols, glowing faintly with energy, were protective markers placed long ago by the ancient civilization that had once inhabited the forest. Lyra traced a path with her hand, showing Elias where they could move safely without triggering a defensive reaction. Elias nodded, following her instructions carefully. The connection between them had strengthened so much that even without speaking, they could coordinate perfectly. The Guardian paused, lowering its head and scanning the ground. Its attention was momentarily diverted, giving Lyra and Elias the opportunity to move forward. They advanced cautiously, matching their movements with the rhythm of the forest. The glowing moss shifted under their feet, forming patterns that seemed almost intentional, guiding them. Lyra's indicator pulsed in harmony with the forest, a steady light that reassured her as much as it reassured Elias. As they moved, the Guardian suddenly turned, its gaze sweeping over the clearing. Lyra froze, instinctively lowering herself to the ground. Elias mirrored her actions, holding his breath. The creature sniffed the air, sensing the energy between them, but then, surprisingly, it stepped aside. It did not attack. Instead, it moved to a position near the ancient cave entrance, blocking other paths and seeming to test their intentions. Lyra realized that the Guardian was not a mindless beast. It was intelligent, evaluating their motives, their ability to respect the forest's rules. Elias whispered, careful not to make a sound. "It's testing us," he said, though he knew Lyra could not understand his words fully. He used gestures, indicating that they should move slowly and respectfully. Lyra nodded, understanding the meaning. Together, they approached the Guardian, keeping their hands visible and movements deliberate. The connection through her indicator allowed them to sense each other's focus and intention, a rhythm of trust and coordination. The Guardian stopped, its head tilting slightly as it regarded them. Lyra's indicator flared, a pulse of energy that communicated alertness and understanding. She reached out slowly, showing the Guardian her open hand, a universal gesture of peace in her culture. Elias followed suit, placing his hand near hers without touching the creature. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then the Guardian stepped aside slightly, creating a narrow path. They moved forward carefully, following the path through the forest. Lyra could feel the Guardian's presence, a constant vibration in the energy fields of the forest. Elias moved in sync with her, aware that any sudden movement could provoke it. They navigated the final stretch to the ancient cave that contained the full repository of knowledge. The Guardian followed at a distance, watching but not interfering, as if guiding them toward a final test. Inside the cave, the air was thick with energy. The walls glowed faintly with symbols that pulsed in rhythm with the forest outside. Lyra placed her hand on one of the symbols, and Elias mirrored her actions. The hum of energy intensified, filling the cave with vibrations that resonated through their bodies. Lyra's indicator flared brightly, not with fear but with exhilaration and focus. Elias felt the connection too, a subtle resonance that confirmed they were in perfect harmony. The energy from the cave began to form patterns in the air, visible as streams of light that twisted and coiled like living threads. Lyra understood immediately that this was a test of coordination and understanding. They had to work together to align the threads correctly, or the energy could become unstable. She gestured to Elias, showing him the movements needed to stabilize the streams. He followed precisely, learning from her gestures, trusting her guidance completely. Hours passed as they worked in perfect coordination. The threads of energy formed complex patterns, resonating in harmony with the forest outside. Lyra's indicator pulsed steadily, a reflection of the focus, trust, and cooperation between them. Elias observed carefully, adjusting his movements to match hers, their combined actions channeling the energy without causing instability. The Guardian outside the cave remained vigilant but silent, as if acknowledging their success. Finally, the last thread aligned. The energy in the cave surged briefly, a bright light that filled the chamber, then settled into a calm, steady hum. The symbols on the walls glowed in harmony, reflecting the balance achieved through their cooperation. Lyra's indicator dimmed to a soft, steady glow, signaling completion and safety. Elias exhaled, feeling the tension leave his body. They had succeeded. Lyra turned to Elias, a mixture of relief and respect in her eyes. The bond formed between them through the indicator, through shared trials, had grown stronger than either had anticipated. Elias smiled, understanding without words that their partnership had achieved something extraordinary. The Guardian outside shifted slightly, then retreated into the shadows, acknowledging their success. The knowledge contained within the cave was now accessible to both species. Lyra and Elias began recording and mapping it, careful to preserve the energy patterns that maintained the balance of the forest. They understood that this repository was not only valuable for scientific study, but also for the survival of their species and the planet itself. The forest had tested them, guided them, and ultimately trusted them with its secrets. As they emerged from the cave, the forest seemed to welcome them. The glowing moss pulsed softly, and the trees swayed gently, as if acknowledging their cooperation and understanding. Lyra's indicator glowed steadily, a quiet testament to the bond formed between human and alien. Elias looked around, sensing the depth of connection they had achieved, not just between themselves, but with the forest and the creatures that inhabited it. The human team waited at the edge of the forest, watching in awe as Elias and Lyra returned. Elias gestured to them, signaling that all was well. Lyra's indicator glowed softly under her chest, a visible sign of trust and success. She had never allowed a human to witness so much of her people's sacred spaces, yet she felt confident that Elias and his team would respect it. The forest remained alive, vibrant, and full of energy, but it no longer felt threatening. The bond between human and alien, tested through trials, danger, and cooperation, had created harmony. Lyra and Elias had proven that understanding, patience, and mutual respect could bridge species and cultures. Humanity's role was no longer one of intrusion but of partnership, earning the trust of a civilization and its living world. As the twin suns began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Lyra and Elias paused together. Her indicator glowed faintly, a reminder of the connection they shared. They looked at each other, not as strangers or representatives of different worlds, but as partners who had faced challenges together and emerged stronger. The forest hummed softly, a lullaby of energy and life, as if acknowledging the bond that had been formed. Lyra understood that this was only the beginning. There would be more trials, more discoveries, and more opportunities to protect the balance of their world. But with Elias by her side and the bond reflected in her indicator, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Elias reached out, offering a hand. Lyra placed hers in his, a gesture of mutual respect and partnership. The indicator glowed gently, pulsing in harmony with the forest. Together, they walked toward the edge of the forest, toward the future of their worlds, a future shaped by cooperation, understanding, and the extraordinary bond formed between human and alien. And in the quiet glow of the forest under the twin suns, the story of trust, courage, and connection reached its first great conclusion. The bond between Lyra and Elias would endure, not just as a personal link, but as a symbol of what humanity could achieve when it approached the unknown with respect, curiosity, and heart.